Zero carbon, really? To challenge the credibility of this pledge, I'm delighted to interview today Philippe Zwati of Mirova. Zero carbon, carbon neutrality, on both sides, the companies and the asset managers, this goal is becoming mainstream. But what is the reality behind these concepts? Could you maybe please help us to understand the complex issues involved?
Of course, basically, we know that we have to decrease our emission in order to reach the objective of the Paris Agreement, but not only the Paris Agreement, to reach a 1.5 degree and try to avoid all the major and negative consequences of the climate change. And especially extreme weather conditions, and also probably collapse of some of the economic activities, migrations, and so on and so forth. In order to do that, we need to decrease carbon emission, and the objective would be to reach the zero carbon, by 2050. If we want to reach 1.5, this is what we have to do. This is huge. This is an incredible objective. It clearly means that we have to change. I would say everything in our everyday life, in the way we produce, in the way we consume. So all the players in the economy and in the society have to take commitments, pledges, in order to reach this zero carbon by 2050. So of course, this is a case of the states, the countries, and this is what we have seen in the Paris Agreement and in all the pledges which are made by the countries. For example, the European Union has decided to take a commitment to decrease by 55% its emission by 2040, and then zero carbon by 2050. France also has made this kind of commitment. But this is also pledges that are taken by companies. And that's more tricky, but also more interesting to look at as an investor, especially. Because when you take this kind of objective at a country level, it's of course the broad economy that you are targeting. But when you reduce it to a sector or to a company, that's become very, very difficult to not only to achieve, but to measure, and also you need to explain what will be the trajectory between the beginning, between the situation today and the situation in 2050. So that's the situation today. There are a lot of commitments, but when the commitments are made, this is the beginning of the story and the beginning of the difficulties, because at that stage you have to measure it and to explain how you are going to fulfill this commitment.
There are different ways to measure carbon footprints and carbon emissions. Can you explain Mirova's methodology to us, please?
Yeah. So carbon footprint, we have at least one criteria which is very clear, which is the metric. It's ton of CO2. So everybody agrees on this at least, and that's something. The first ground of all the technologies, all the methodologies. But there are different ways to measure it, and if I can just summarize, we used to distinguish what we call Scope 1, Scope 2, and Scope 3 emissions. Scope 1 are the emissions which are, I would say, directly going outside of the plant, for example, outside of the company. So it's just the CO2 which is going out. So it's your direct emission. Okay. The Scope 2 is the emission which are linked to the use of the electricity, because when you use electricity, the electricity is produced elsewhere, and it sometimes uses coal or gas or oil to be produced. So this is Scope 2. And then So a lot of companies stop there and say, this is my direct emissions, scope 1 and scope 2. But of course, it's not enough. You also have to measure what we call scope 3, which are the indirect emissions, the emissions which comes from the goods you are buying. So the materials, for example, you are using, but also the emissions which will be emitted by the people who are going to use your product and services. For example, when you build a car, of course, it will be used by people, and so it will also emit in the future. This is scope 3. And then what we have added to this at Mirova, when we have decided to build our own methodology with a French consultant, which is called Carbon 4, a couple of years ago, we also thought that it was very important to measure what we call avoided emissions. That means that when you are, for example, a producer of wind turbines, of course, you emit a lot of CO2 in order to build the wind turbines. But then these wind turbines will help you to avoid emissions in the future. And so it's very important to also take into account these avoided emissions. It's not easy to measure it. It could lead to greenwashing sometimes. But if you do it properly, it's very important because it will help you to also move your asset allocation into that direction.
When companies set zero carbon targets, what do they mean exactly? How do they intend to achieve them?
Of course, reducing emissions and reaching a zero carbon target, if you want to do it, you have to follow 3 steps. The first one is to avoid emission whenever you can do it. Okay, so that means stop doing some activities or moving completely, for example, from fossil fuel to renewable energy for your electricity. So in that case, you are completely avoiding the emission. There is no emission in that. Second part is for the activities where you cannot completely avoid the emission, you have to lower the emission. So it's the second step. Lowering the emission when you cannot avoid it. And then that will lead to, I would say, the minimum emission you can have at a stage of the innovation. I mean, this lower level will not be the same today and in 5 years and in 10 years, because we will benefit from new technologies and new product and services. So when you have done all this, you have some emission that you cannot avoid and cannot reduce. And so in that case, you can compensate them. So offset this emission, for example, by buying carbon credits, which are issued by companies which are, for example, planting trees in emerging countries. But not only, it could come also for renewable energy plants or from energy efficiency projects. So that means that you will pay in order to continue to emit some CO2 through these offsetting schemes.
Philippe, does Mirova exclude oil and gas companies?
No. The short answer is no. Short answer is no. We do not exclude. This is not the way we manage our portfolios. We from the beginning we have decided to have an investment process which is not a screening out, but much more a screening in investment process. That means that we invest in companies which are providing solutions for a more sustainable world. And so we analyze companies, we analyze their behavior, their corporate social responsibility behavior, their processes, how they behave with all the other stakeholders, but also we analyze the product and the services they are putting on the market. Okay, and so so of course with this kind of process, at the end of the day, we do not have any oil company in our portfolio today. But that's the end of the process. This is not the starting point of the process, and we would be very happy to have one. And we think that it will be the case in the coming years, because today we are seeing a lot of evolution in this sector, which was clearly not the case a couple of years ago. But today there are a lot of evolution in this sector, and which is clearly taking into account the situation, global warming, and so on. And we think that some of the oil companies, not all of them, but some of them, will be able in the future to modify their business model and adapt to 1.5 or 2 degree trajectory. That does not mean they will not do oil anymore, but they will do their business in a way which will be compatible with these long-term trajectories.
Thank you, Philippe. You mentioned offsetting.
I would add maybe one point about oil companies. We have been speaking a lot these last years about what we call stranded assets. That means that the oil companies, are evaluated on the market, in the financial market, mainly by the amount of reserves, oil reserves they have. Okay, and but we know that if we burn all these reserves, all this oil which is under the ground, we won't achieve the objective of the Paris Agreement. So that means that these assets, these oil reserves, are what we call stranded assets, and that means that the valuation of the oil companies was, especially a couple of years ago, too high compared to the real values of these companies. And this is the reason why most of the coal and oil companies have suffered a lot these last years.
Thank you. You mentioned offsetting. In your views, Philippe, are both carbon markets, the compulsory and the voluntary one, efficient today?
There are a lot of controversies about offsetting, because today there is not a common standard and really broadly accepted standard about offsetting. Basically, how it works: you start a conservation project, or you plant some trees in a degraded land, and you restore some lands in Africa, for example, or in Latin America, and then this project allows you to get some carbon credits. These carbon credits are certified by auditing companies, which are specialized in this kind of auditing. And so these carbon credits, then you can sell it to oil companies, to aircraft companies, or plane companies, and so on. The problem is twofold. The first one is, are these projects really good and really providing some CO2 emission reduction, which sometimes is not really the case, because, for example, let's say you plant trees, but then you harvest these trees very rapidly after 3 or 4 years. And of course, the result is that there is no really big gain in terms of CO2 emission reductions. So you have to look at it very carefully. Is it really good in terms of CO2 emission reduction? But not only about this. Is it also really good in terms of the other social and environmental impacts? If you do this in taking land and grabbing land from existing communities and putting them aside, and the result of this is that they lose their job, for example, this is clearly not good. You have reduced emission, but you have also some very negative impacts in terms of social impact, especially. So it's very important that the ESG, environmental and social analysis of the projects, is doing very properly in order that you avoid this kind of issue. Then the second point is about the price of these carbon credits. And then on the market, you can find, very different prices in terms of carbon credits. You can buy carbon credits at, I would say, between $2 and $3 the tons of CO2. But you can find also carbon credits at 150 euros. Because depending on the project you are financing, it's very different. When you plant trees in Kenya, it could be very, very, very cheap, and so you can have a carbon credit at $2 or $3. When you base your carbon credits on projects, for example, of renewable energy or energy efficiency in France or in Europe, then it will be much more costly. And so when you are a company, a European company, it's very important that you diversify the carbon credits you use. If you are only looking to offset your emission at the lowest price, probably this could be interpreted as greenwashing.
Yes,
So that's the situation. So so just maybe to conclude about this, because you mentioned voluntary market and a compulsory market. All what I've said is on the voluntary market, okay? Because these carbon credits, you sell it to companies which are not obliged to buy it. And then there is the compulsory market, which is the EU ETS market. And on this market, the price was also very low 2 or 3 years ago. It was less than $10, 10 euros the tons of CO2. But thanks to a reform of this EU ETS scheme, today it has risen to 40 euros. So I think really it's becoming more and more efficient.